Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to my channel, and today we're going to be discussing arguably one of the most important verses in the entire Bible, which happens to be a hotly contested topic between Catholics and Protestants on its meaning. So let's get right into it. Have you ever heard from a Catholic that Matthew chapter 16 verse 18 proves that Jesus founded the Catholic Church, or from a Protestant that it doesn't do that at all? Well, that's exactly the issue we're going to be surveying today, and a whole lot more. Now let's start by pointing out that St. Peter was the first pope of the Catholic Church. If we do a quick Google search, we see that St. Peter pulls up as the first pope of the Catholic Church. Now many people are quick to wonder where the biblical evidence for Peter being the pope, leader of the church, and his primacy is. And that is where Matthew chapter 16 verse 18, as well as a few other verses, come in. Now, we won't be surveying all the other evidence, such as the church fathers, other historical figures, and historical events, just biblical evidence in this video. Matthew chapter 16 verse 18 says, "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of the netherworld shall not prevail against it." This might seem easy to interpret if we know that Peter's name means rock, but the issue is that Jesus is the one saying this, and the second time he says rock, Jesus could be talking about himself, so that the verse would read something like, "You are Peter, and on myself I will build my church." Although I disagree with this prevailing Protestant interpretation for a couple reasons. The first thing we need to understand is that the New Testament was originally written in Greek, but as I will explain shortly, that may not be entirely true. Anyway, the New Testament was written in Greek, and this is very useful knowledge as we can go back to the nearly original manuscripts and translate the Greek word for word so as to get the best understanding of what the original text meant. Often, when something is translated into another language, it loses some of its meaning, and that's exactly what happens here. In the nearly original Greek manuscripts, the word for Peter used is Petros, and the word rock in Greek is Petra. Now Petros is defined as a little stone or pebble, and Petra as a large or massive stone. Some use this as evidence that Jesus was actually telling Peter that he was insignificant, and that the large rock, Petra, aka Jesus, was the person on whom his church would be built. Now this would be a decent interpretation if it weren't that the words Petros and Petra are actually synonymous in 1st century Greek. They both meant stone. Although centuries before Jesus' time, they meant different things, but by the time Jesus arrived, the distinction had already disappeared. This is admitted by both Catholic and non-Catholic scholars. If you don't believe me, here's a citation to look at. And what's even more telling is that this difference in nouns can only be found in a dialect of Greek called Attic, not Koine Greek, which is what the New Testament was written in. So when people claim, as Trusting God America does on their website, that the word Peter and the word rock on which Christ was to build his church are two separate and distinct words, each having a different meaning, they're promoting a known historical falsity. Now, I hope they aren't doing this knowingly, otherwise that would be very malicious. And if Jesus would have wanted to call Peter a small stone, Matthew would have recorded him saying the Greek word lithos, but this isn't what happens. Now, it's also important to note that Jesus, the apostles, and the Jews in Palestine all spoke Aramaic, although most of them did know Greek as it was the lingua franca of a Mediterranean world, being used for culture and commerce. Greek was very important as it was used in the writing of the New Testament so as to reach as many people as possible. Since it was written in Greek, that meant that people from places such as Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch could read it. Although it must be noted here that many scholars now hold the view that Matthew was originally written in Aramaic, and even records kept by Eusebius of Caesarea testify to this point. Most scholars believe that Matthew was translated early on into Greek, perhaps by Matthew himself. Now, someone might object and ask how that's reliable information when the oldest manuscripts we have are in Greek, but it's important to note that we don't have any of the New Testament originals, and they could very possibly have been written in Aramaic and translated soon thereafter. Also, Jesus on a number of occasions is recorded speaking in Aramaic, like in Matthew chapter 27 verse 46 when he says, "Ila ila lama sabachthani," which translates to, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And even St. Paul speaks Aramaic 4 times in Galatians and 4 times in 1 Corinthians. Also, Jesus gives Peter his name in Aramaic in John chapter 1 verse 42 when he says, "Then he brought him to Jesus. Jesus looked at him and said, 'You are Simon, the son of John. You will be called Cephas.'" Now Cephas is a transliteration of the Aramaic word Kepha, which is rendered as Kephas in its Hellenistic form. Kephar means rock, the same as Petra, which means Matthew 16:18 reads something like, "You are Kepha, and on this Kepha I will build my church." This makes it clear that Jesus is equating Simon and the rock and gives no plausible grounds for holding the Protestant interpretation. Although we are left with one unsolved mystery. Why did Matthew use the Greek word Petros for Simon's new name instead of Petra? The answer lies with the fact that Greek and Aramaic have different grammatical structures. This is evident in the fact that Aramaic uses Kepha in both places in Matthew 16:18, but Greek runs into a problem arising from nouns taking different gender endings. Side note, if you only speak English, then you're probably going to be fairly confused about what I'm talking about now. But people who speak languages such as Spanish with gender endings should understand what I'm saying. Anyway, Greek includes masculine, feminine, and neuter nouns. And the fact that Petra is a feminine noun means you can't give that name to a man, or at least back then you couldn't. So the noun takes on a masculine ending and changes to Petros. So people still ask why Petra is used then. And most scholars believe it could be just a stylistic change to prevent a repetitive word choice. And if anyone claims that the word Petra is evidence that the Protestant interpretation is correct, and that Jesus is referring to himself when he says Petra, then ask them why Jesus would refer to himself using a female gender ending when he is supposed to be the Son of God, not daughter of God. Historically speaking, it just wouldn't hold ground. And there's also the fact that the Gospels don't allow the downplaying of Peter's role in the church. This is evident in Matthew 16:15 through 19, which doesn't say, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are an insignificant pebble, and on this rock I will build my church. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." But says something rather like, "You are a rock, and on this rock I will build my church." It's clear here that Jesus is giving Peter a threefold blessing, which includes the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Now this doesn't undermine his authority, since Jesus was installing Peter as a form of a chief steward or prime minister under the King of Kings, by giving him the keys to the kingdom. This practice can actually be found in the kings of the Old Testament, who appointed chief stewards who served under them in a position of great authority to rule inhabitants of the kingdom. Just look at Isaiah chapter 22 verse 22, which says, "I will place the keys of the house of David on his shoulder. When he opens, no one shall shut, and when he shuts, no one shall open." Now this sounds an awful lot like Matthew 16:19, which says, "I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." The symbolism here is amazing, and something most people just skim right over without even recognizing. Also, one verse prior in Isaiah chapter 22 verse 21, it says, "I will clothe him with your robe, and gird him with your sash, and give over to him your authority. He shall be a father to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and to the house of Judah." This, of course, can be understood as being part of the same duties of the person who has the keys to the kingdom of heaven, as it is directly followed by verse 22, which we just looked at. And to further single Peter out as the leader and guide of the flock, John 21 verses 15 through 17 says, "When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?' He said to him, 'Yes, Lord, you know that I love you.' He said to him, 'Feed my lambs.' He said to him a second time, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me?' He said to him, 'Yes, Lord, you know that I love you.' He said to him, 'Tend my sheep.' He said to him a third time, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me?' Peter was distressed that he had said to him a third time, 'Do you love me?' And he said to him, 'Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you.' Jesus said to him, 'Feed my sheep.'"
It honestly couldn't be any clearer that Jesus gave Peter a special position above his other apostles as their leader, and the leader of the church for that matter. And to put the icing on the cake, in the Old Testament, the authority of the prime minister under the king was passed on from one man to another down through the ages by the giving of the keys, which were worn on their shoulders as a sign of authority. It is precisely this giving of the keys that started out with Peter and has been passed down for 2,000 years by the means of the papacy that gives the Pope his authority. Now, I want you guys to know that this wasn't a comprehensive covering, even though we did look at a lot of material. You can also look at Acts and the letters of Peter and different areas in the Bible, since we were just focusing on biblical evidence in this video, and you could build another entire argument out of just those things. But unfortunately, we don't have time in this video to look at that stuff. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video and found it helpful. Let me know whether you did or didn't in the comment section below, and if you did, definitely hit that like button, as it helps me out a lot and shows me what you guys like. And feel free to let me know of any topics you want me to cover next, or if you want more of these videos on biblical interpretation. Also, please consider subscribing so you can stay up to date on all of my latest content. As always, God bless.